in Crowley's introduction, he said, the 72 spirits of the Goetia are parts of the human brain. And I used to read that, and I would teach classes and stuff, and I would always amend that and say he meant mind, right? He didn't mean brain. He meant the mind, right? Which is a more amorphous kind of idea than the physical squishy stuff in your head, which is the brain. But the neuroscience shows that no, he was spot on, because we do have actual locations in the brain where different personalities and different kinds of entities, can actually take up residence.
Welcome to the Repatterning Podcast, where we believe your mind-body system is your domain and that choosing the beliefs, habits, and patterns that best support you is your birthright. I'm your host, Arden Lee, creator of the Repatterning Project, an 8-week course in learning to free yourself from the patterns of your past and program your mind for your dreams of the future. Join me for these extraordinary conversations as we unpack the keys to creating our reality. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Repatterning Podcast. I am so excited to welcome today's guest, Phil Farber. Philip H. Farber, author of Brain Magick, Exercises in Meta-Magick and Invocation. And he is also the author of High Magic, a guide to cannabis in ritual and mysticism. And he is also the author of Future Ritual, Magic for the 21st Century, which for my industrial music fans out there, has a foreword written by none other than Genesis Breyer P. Orridge, the non-binary parent of industrial music. And Phil is also a practitioner of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and hypnosis. He has a private practice in New York's Hudson Valley, and he has developed a system of magic that he calls Meta-Magick, which he can also train folks in. And I'm so excited to speak about that today because naturally, that is quite relevant to repatterning, if not something that overlaps almost entirely in the Venn diagram. So tell us a little bit first, Phil, about what you practice and what is Meta-Magick? What is Brain Magick?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Well, let's see. What is Brain Magick? What is Meta-Magick? Meta-Magick is essentially magic that's about magic. The idea was that I was going to do workshops and books, magic works to teach people how to do magic. And originally, way back when I started out teaching the real traditional stuff, the lesser vanishing ritual of the pentagram and goodies like that, rituals that, hexagram rituals, pentagram rituals, planetary stuff, astrological, the stuff that would be familiar to traditional ceremonial magicians. But after a while, as I was teaching this, I realized that some of it, you couldn't really demonstrate it like on the spot in a workshop. I mean, you could do an invocation of something, of a god, a goddess, or whatever, and people would connect with it or not. And would there be a result? During the space of a workshop? Maybe, maybe not, right? So at one point, I decided that I was really only going to teach stuff that I could demonstrate right on the spot, right? That if stuff was going to happen, it was going to happen right there in the room. So I started working on magic that would demonstrate magic, and that's really where Meta-Magick came from. It draws on just about
Nice.
everything that I've ever encountered in the magical realm. Again, I started out with the real traditional Western esoteric, Golden Dawnish, Thalamic kind of stuff. But over the years, I was exposed to, just a big variety of all sorts of different traditions, of pagan traditions, Wiccan, voodoo, whatever. Anytime I had a chance to go sit in on a ritual or take a workshop or whatever, for many years, I took every opportunity I could. So I started noticing the commonalities between these different traditions, right? What was it that made a ritual in every one of these? What was it that worked in every one of these, right? After a while, I started, I don't know, deconstructing or prying things apart to see what were the pieces that actually, did something that worked and that I could demonstrate in the context of a workshop. So I came up with some things, several books worth of things, in fact.
What I love about Brain Magick in particular is that it really shows you that you can this is going to sound so simplistic, but you can change your mind. You can change your programming. I was so honored that you asked me to write the foreword for the new edition. So you guys, this copy that I have in my hands right now is the older edition of Brain Magic, but there is going to be a new edition that's coming out soon. And I was just so excited when you asked me to write the foreword to it, because so much of my work in repatterning is based around the idea that we can change the way that we are programmed, that we are all programmed in some way or another because we all grow up experiencing interactions with the world, experiencing conditioning of ourselves and our minds by our experiences. And none of us has like a default set of programming. We all are the sum of our experiences. And so it excites me, the idea that we can change these things. And by changing our internal programming, we can generate a different external result in our lives. So I was so honored when you asked me to write it, because this is exactly the kind of work that I want to let more people know in the world exists. And one of the things that I said in that forward is like, I hope that not only do you do these exercises and you find things that work for you, but even if you just take away the fact that it is possible, that you can change your own brain. So share a little bit with us about how you develop those exercises and what they do for folks.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you again for writing a great forward for it. And I'll tell you, I actually, when it came time the book was, it went out of print at the original publisher. They decided they didn't want to reprint it, so they gave me the rights back, and I took it to another publisher who were friends of mine, and I thought would be interested. And I did a little magic around it. I mean, I didn't want to release the same thing. I thought, some introductions or forwards or something would be a nice addition. And I did a little magic around it, and two names came into my mind, and one of them was yours, and the other was Don Webb. And I know, you're a good choice because I know that you worked through it with your groups, or at least some of the exercises, and you were familiar with it, and the similarity with the repatterning stuff. And the other name that popped out was Don Webb, and if you're not familiar with his books on magic and stuff like that, they're really awesome. I highly recommend Uncle Seknat's Guide to the Left Hand Path, which is just a great one of the
What a great
classic books.
title.
And Don's a good guy and a terse and often funny writer. I mean, the names just sort of like really popped into my mind, just like, these are must have. So, so I'm glad you were able to do it, and I'm glad Don was able to do it.
I just want to say I'm so honored by the fact that like your spirits or your guides recommend it. I'm like, now I'm doubly flattered.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you. Thank you again. Thank you again for that. So tell us more about what brain magic is and what it does. Explain some of the exercises, the visualizations, and the results that folks can expect when they try them.
Okay, well, a few of the big pieces that went into it, I have a background in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and NLP, it provides a model that you can use to, I don't know, take apart behaviors or understand the elements of them. So that was a big piece there, understanding magic through the lens of NLP. Also, I'm just a science geek, so I read all kinds of stuff about neuroscience and consciousness and stuff like that. And I started, I don't know, my brain at some point started putting the pieces together where the NLP and the magic and the neuroscience kind of intersected. And again, I taught most of that stuff in workshops for years before it found its way into a book. But the neuroscience is kind of a new thing, right? Our forebears who wrote books on magic, Aleister Crowley or whoever, Israel Gardy, there was no neuroscience then, right? So it was consciousness and psychology and so on, kind of a black box, right? Like something happens in here and we don't quite know what it is, but here's what comes out, right? By adding in the element of neuroscience, we have tools now, really just in the last 20 years or so, where you can actually like observe what someone's brain is doing in real time, right? the fMRI machine in particular, and PET scans and things like that. But you could put somebody in there and you can actually see what parts of the brain get involved when you do stuff. And there's been a few neuroscientists who specialize in, let's call it neurotheology, right? In the study of like what happens when people have religious experiences or spiritual experiences. And who's the one guy, Andrew Newberg, I believe, who's actually written, like, I think his book is called Your Brain on God or something like that. Now,
Oh, I've heard of that one.
unfortunately, the neuroscientists have they have a bias, like most people in our culture, towards the monotheistic religions, right? Towards the Judeo-Christian religion. So a lot of these studies that happened, particularly around this, were like not what happens when you think about gods, but what happens when you think about God, right? And so that one guy, right? So I thought that this needed to be applied differently, right? And we have a different approach in the magical realm and the pagan realm and so on. So I started. I don't have an MRI machine, but I can observe what people do, and I can get feedback from them and so on. So I started, I don't know, deriving some sort of general principles from the neuroscience that would apply to magic. And one of the really big pieces of recent neuroscience is the ideas of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, right? Neuroplasticity being the formation of new neural pathways, neurogenesis being the formation of new brain cells, new neurons. I think if Genesis P-Arch had hung in there long enough, maybe he would have been neurogenesis prior P-Arch or something. I don't know. I
I
think
love that.
he would have loved the idea. All right, so both neuroplasticity and neurogenesis are important factors both in how we feel about ourselves, our mood, and so on. In fact, for years they've been giving people antidepressants based on this weird theory of like serotonin levels, and the recent research on that is it's complete bullshit. The what's really happening is that there's a side effect of these drugs is that they cause neurogenesis in the area of the brain known as the hippocampus, which seems to reset some of the feelings of mood and so on. We've known even before that, we've known that there's other substances that do that better, and mostly the psychedelics and things like that. And ketamine therapy is huge right now because that's really what ketamine does: is it stimulates neurogenesis in the hippocampus and does some other things. Hopefully our magic, if we have things that can access that can stimulate that, that's great, right? Neuroplasticity, on the other hand, is about the formation of new neural pathways, which in regular old language is learning, right? When you make a new neural pathway, it's because you've learned something, right? Either negative or positive or whatever. So when we want to change ourselves, change the way we think, or change our brain, that's essentially what we're talking about is neuroplasticity, because we need to kind of reset the neural pathways and establish a deeper form of learning, right? That's more than just the superficial remembering of facts or whatever, like you have in school, but something much deeper that changes our consciousness and the way that we think about the world and so on. So all of that's possible, and I found plenty of clues in neuroscience to some techniques that you can do, but more in the realm of magic and things like that, where I saw people, performing certain kinds of rituals and having just, big life-changing things happen. And so looking at those through these filters of neuroscience, NLP, and so on, I was able to sort of see some of the elements that made them work. I probably not all of them. That would be, I don't know, 10 more books. But some of the elements that made these techniques work, and particularly noticing the commonality between different systems and so on. That's what I started experimenting with for my own fun and education. And when I got things that I responded really well to, then I tried it out with friends, with groups that wanted to do workshops with me, and eventually with my one-on-one clients that I work with. So some of these techniques, I've been working with them for 25, 30 years or so, and there are some depths and some variations that have not yet made it into a book, but maybe there'll be a Brain Magic 2 or something one day. But I'm enjoying the fact that Brain Magic, that there was enough interest in it for a second edition to come out, and I do get plenty of email of people who, "I tried that one exercise, and that changed all sorts of things for me," and so on. I love getting email like that. It's great knowing that I've helped somebody change in a positive way. I still get Future Ritual was published in 1995. I actually wrote it in 1990 or 91. I still get emails from people who've somehow found it's been out of print for years, but people who've somehow found a copy and said, "Oh, it changed my life. It got me into magic," and whatever. I'm like, really? Okay. That's the old stuff.
Share with us what happens in the brain, speaking of the neuroscience aspect. Share with us, if you would, what happens in the brain when we have a formative learning experience, such as, we touch the hot stove, we learn that it's hot. We open ourselves up to our crush and, they punch us in the stomach or whatever, if you're me in second grade, you know, and we
Right.
learn these sort of associations. It's true, man. It's oh man, that informs so much of my feelings of rejection around relationships for decades afterwards. And share with us, if you would, like, what happens from a neuroscience perspective when we have a formative experience like that, and then also, what happens when we're rewriting that code, either with NLP, repatterning, brain magic, with the exercises that you've detailed. What are the things that are happening on that neural pathway level?
Okay. Well, that's a big question. The three factors that really seem to make a difference in neuroplasticity are intensity, duration, and novelty. And so intensity, if something is powerful enough, you're gonna learn it. You're gonna remember it. Right? You getting punched in the stomach is probably more of an intense experience than if somebody had gone and walked off. Right? Something that you remember as being more intense. Duration. Let's say you practice something every single day for years, or you have an experience that just lasts for a really, really long time. That's going to stay in your consciousness, even longer. And novelty, right? If something is new and different and is surprising in a way, again, it's gonna set those neural pathways a lot stronger than something that you're always used to. This is actually one of the pieces that I got from Genesis PRage is that when we practice ritual, you have to change it up at some point, right? You have to evolve from the ritual, right? If you're doing just the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, the Golden Dawn used to require their new students to do that every day for a year before they would give them any more information or whatever. But at some point, it becomes rote. You have that duration factor, but at some point, that kind of drops off, and it becomes sort of an ordinary thing that you do. And it may still work to some extent, and I still do rituals that I learned 40 years ago, whatever. But if you change it up, that's the point where you say, well, I need to learn the next ritual, right? And so on. And the next ritual seems even more powerful because it's new, it's different, it's right. You have to sort of keep, I don't know, escalating your magic so that you're getting the same kind of things. I mean, nothing against practicing the same thing every day for a really long time. There is that duration factor, right? But particularly with like ritual magic kind of stuff, eventually it does become rote. With meditation, on the other hand, meditation does seem to, I don't know, not have an upper limit on that. That you, if you keep meditating longer and longer. Some of the interesting studies that I pulled from in the book were about how the Dalai Lama provided some of his top meditators. for these brain scan studies. And I mean, he had guys who had been doing the same meditation for 30 something years, and they were able to do some pretty interesting things in the scanning machine. Right? Their brains were a little bit more under their control than those of us who only practiced meditation a few times or whatever. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, what I love about also the exercises in Brain Magic is that they are predominantly focused on visualization and also calling up other internal sensory experiences such as auditory, kinesthetic, how something feels, what is the texture of something, what is the temperature, what is the color, what is the brightness, etc. And these are also, as you and I both know, these are also those submodalities are tools that are also used in NLP. So, what your book is essentially saying, in the way that I see it, that I perceive it, is that we can create those same sort of neuroplastic learning experiences without having to experience them externally. We can actually, there are ways through visualization, invocation, evocation, again, calling up those sensory experiences internally simply by imagining them and immersing ourselves in them. There are ways of hacking the code of our neurodevelopmental learning. Is that, do I would you say that that's that's an accurate sort of
Yeah,
summation of some of your work?
sure. There's certainly a power to our imagination. Carl Jung defined magic as active imagination, right? So it's also the way that I use it in Brain Magic. It's applying some principles of what's known as embodied cognition, right? That much of the way that we think and do things and navigate the world is based in metaphors of the body, right? So you have a metaphor. Life is a journey, right? It's means your body is moving, right? Think less with your head and more with your heart, right? We're locating things in our body and so on. And the nervous system, the human nervous system, is just unbelievably complex. And one of the things that it does is it doubles up, sometimes triples and quadruples up on functions that one part of the system uses, right? So your visceral feelings will not only tell you that, like, oh, there's something wrong with my stomach, but you may have a very similar visceral feeling to a sense of loss or an emotional state, right? So the nervous system kind of doubles up on that, right? On the That's sort of a negative example. Similarly, people who have panic attacks, where they're breathing hard and hyperventilating or whatever, if they get into a situation where they are breathing hard, they're exercising or they have to run or something like that, sometimes their consciousness will mistake the breathing hard for a panic attack, and they'll have a panic attack. I often have to tell my clients this stuff. It's like, "No, no, you're not. That you were just running and you got out of breath." But there's ways to, sort of have to re-anchor those kinds of experiences. In the positive way, we have wonderful positive things that we feel in our body, tingling sensations and expansiveness and things, when we're having positive emotional states, right? When you fall in love, you have feelings all through your body that might relate to other kinds of things, other experiences that you have. But we're mostly able to like differentiate, right? This is an emotional state. This is a visceral feeling of my body. But the nervous system doesn't always differentiate it. It often does some of the same things. So when people say, oh, I get a bad feeling from this or that or the other thing, I will often say, well, where in your body do you have the feeling? Right. That's kind of the first thing. And then we'll get some other submodalities on that, right? How big is it? Is it moving? Is it cycling? Does it have a color or a sound to it? And then you can take some of those submodalities and you can start tweaking them and changing things around. Right. In NLP, we have the idea of driver submodalities that very often there's a submodality that will change all the other ones, right? So sometimes if you change the, I don't know, location is a big one, right? If you take that colored blob that they've created to represent something unpleasant, and you change the location, you have to move it out of their body. It causes a right away. Some people will say like, "Oh well, I feel better now," or whatever. You can actually use that as a form of pain control. I will do that hypnotically with folks. I actually had just had a client who, not his main issue that we were working on, but he did have to go to the dentist that day. So I taught him how to do that at the dentist, right? You take the feeling of pain in your mouth and just, put it over here for a little while. And, then you can bring it back in when you're done and it feels better. And it worked really well for him. I think his dentist is going to start recommending hypnotherapists for, for their patients. So,
Nice. One of the things that I always like to do in my approach to my work is I always like to imagine that I'm having to explain it to the former version of myself who was unawakened, for lack of a better word. And I know that my former self would have had an argument around, like, well, changing myself internally isn't going to do anything. It's the external world that's the problem. I don't want to change me. I'm great, I and to be fair, there was a lot in my healing that required validation rather than change, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean that the work was not also required. But that's sort of like, I don't see what changing me is going to do. I want the thing that I want externally. I want the love that I want, the relationship that I want the money that I want, and I feel this sort of like, for lack of a better word, almost entitlement to it, not knowing that there might be patterns in our shadow that are actually leading to the results that we're dissatisfied with. So, how would you explain to someone who is caught in a thought pattern like that, like, oh, changing myself internally won't do anything because it's the externals that I want? How would you explain to them how transformative that work can be, that we can do that work internally and our externals of our lives will end up changing too?
right. Well, I often do get clients, anybody who does any kind of counseling work or coaching work. You will get clients who want to blame their problems on everything around them and not on what's going on internally. And I don't know. One way that I do that is rather than necessarily explain it, which I will at least to the extent that we've just discussed it here. But I'll demonstrate, right? I will do some less consequential uses of the same kind of technique with a smaller problem or something that they're feeling right then, and have them notice the change, and then they'll be much more open to working on the other stuff. So if you can demonstrate it, it's always better than an explanation. So I lean into that a little bit more, but there are certainly clients where I do have to explain that. And the I don't know, sometimes a client isn't a good fit, right? I mean, if somebody's really going to double down on that and go, no, it was all because of my ex, and blah blah blah, right? And it may well be, but the ex isn't there, and I can't work with them either. So
Right.
if they're just gonna keep repeating that, I will say, well, this is probably not a good fit. I'll recommend somebody else. But for the most part, I do that. That has happened very rarely, but it has happened. Again, demonstrating is always better. When I do have to explain it, I will tell stories about other clients, who did something similar, or something from my own experience, or I'll quote a historical person who told a story similar to that. I do have all of those. I do have the NLP metaphoric storytelling toolkit as well as the Meta-Magick one. So I can use that from time to time and just give people the idea of plant something in their unconscious mind, and other NLP tools and embedded suggestions and things like that are often very helpful. So and I'm usually very upfront with my clients that I'm going to be, I might be telling you a story about something, but I'm saying something completely different to your unconscious mind, right? Uh, you know,
Nice.
they'll every now and then I'll get one who'll, say, "Oh, did you just make some kind of weird suggestion to me?" And I'll go, "Yes, of course I did. Isn't that what you're paying me to do?"
Exactly.
There's ways
You're
to work
getting
it
the
out.
result one way or another. So what is your favorite anecdote of the biggest change that you've seen someone make through Brain Magic?
Oh boy,
What's the best story
geez,
you've
I got
got?
some. uh, there's so many. I mean, I do. I see at least several clients every week. Sometimes sometimes several clients a day. And there's been many of these situations. I like it when there's like corroborating synchronicity to these things. I had and there's a couple of stories in Brain Magic that I tell. One of a guy who he pulled an entity out of himself, and he felt stuck in his business life, and he wanted to do something new and different, and so he pulled out this entity which gave the name of I remember what it was, Edom, I think. And and it was this female figure who basically gave him the formula for a new way of creating a beverage that he was interested in. And when we went and I'm always like, I Google weird names and stuff like that. And it turns out that Edom, it was a city in the ancient world in the Middle East. And the importance of the city was that there was water there. There were wells that that people had for their beverages, and it was named after the goddess who was in charge of the wells, I guess, like that. So I love stuff like that, right? And you get these weird synchronicities. Another one that I think is in the book. I had a woman who was afraid of flying, and so we took her fear and we externalized it, and it had a color. I think it was like red and white and green or something like that. And we worked with it, and she felt much better about getting on the airplane. And she got on the airplane. The inside of the airplane was all red, white, and green, the same colors as the as her entity. And she immediately like just felt like right at home. She was like, "Oh, this is obviously where I'm supposed to be right now." And she had a great flight and had a good time. So there's been plenty like that. There's been every now and then I will get a client who has no history of anything about magic, whose entity will have the name of a goetic entity or some other ancient god or goddess that they would have no way of knowing about. And I believe them when they say they don't know anything about magic. It's often why they're coming to me to learn about magic. So synchronicities like that are fun, and they suggest that there's something a little bit more going on. That this isn't just I don't know. Some people try to put magic like it's a form of human psychology and nothing else. Right now, magic partakes of human psychology. It definitely, we are humans. You can't avoid it. But when stuff like that happens, there's something else going on, right? There's something a little bit, or maybe very much, beyond just the kind of ordinary coaching kind of things, right? If somebody came at him and they said, "Oh, I made a decision to change my diet or whatever," and they do it and they feel better. Great, wonderful, right? That's a good thing. But if they say, "Well, a horse-headed being named Oribos appeared before me and started telling me about whatever," then I'm like, "Oh, really?" I think we have to go in there a little bit more and check that out. So fun stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me actually, we had very recently we had Dr. Jamie Marich on the show, who is a clinician who both specializes in and also has lived experience of dissociative identities. And there's these sort of thoughts coming through from a lot of leaders in that field, both for better and worse. But for example, Dick Schwartz with IFS is now speaking about internal parts potentially being spirits, just like within the last few months or so. There's also the work of Robert Falconer, who talks about addictions and things being entities in that he calls them unattached burdens. And so there's this idea sort of floating around this space that we can have other, I suppose, pockets of consciousness, like organized consciousness, come into the body and and start, behaving in different ways. There are folks who their own consciousness has been fragmented into different pieces of spirit, right? Dissociative identities. And then there are
Right.
also like floaters that can come along and sort of attach into the body, whether someone, is already plural or not. So when you do those sort of evocations and you gather that sort of anecdotal evidence that, oh, this actually correlates to an ancient Mesopotamian spirit or the name of a city or something along those lines. Like, do you believe that that's what's happening? Is that there are actually other forms of spirit consciousness that are potentially coming into the body and causing behaviors in folks?
I do think so, and I've had some experiences myself that were weird enough to convince me of that. People with dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities. There was actually a study some years back where they took some of these folks and put them in the fMRI machine, and they could actually see the areas of the brain where there were distinct personalities. There's like this part of the brain's working, doing something, and this part's doing something, and there's no connectivity between them, right? So there's, I mean, definitely the potential for our individual brains to play host to or to represent different consciousnesses even at the same time. And most of us do this. I mean, we do this when we sleep and we dream about other people and things like that. You could dream of a friend who acts very much like your friend does and makes decisions and tells jokes like your friend does, right? But it's not them. It's something working in your brain, maybe, right? Sorry, my maybe logic part of the brain comes up every now and then with this, and there's always a maybe. Add a maybe to the end of every sentence I say, and it'll make more sense. So the very often when we're doing this kind of thing, uh, all right. Actually, I'm going to take this back even further. I mean, historically, this is a more common idea in older animistic societies and shamanistic societies. And shamans did a booming business in pulling bad spirits out of people and things like that, right? And then let's see, fast forward from the Paleolithic up to the early 1900s, when Aleister Crowley wrote the introduction to one of the lesser volume of the Lesser Keys of Solomon. It was one of the first English translations by Mathers. And in Crowley's introduction, he said, "The 72 spirits of the Goetia are parts of the human brain." And I used to read that, and I would teach classes and stuff, and I would always amend that and say he meant mind, right? He didn't mean brain. He meant the mind, right? Which is a more amorphous kind of idea than the physical squishy stuff in your head, which is the brain. But the neuroscience shows that no, he was spot on because we do have actual locations in the brain where different personalities and different kinds of entities, can actually take up residence. The dissociative identity disorder studies showed it on that level. But I think if we were to do some goetic magic and put someone in the MRI, we would see something pretty similar. We would see different parts of the brain lighting up that corresponded to some of these different entities. I think that would be a cool study to do. If anyone wants to fund me and provide an fMRI machine, we'll do that.
Oh
So,
my gosh, I want to be a part of that.
okay. I mean, so with that said, all right, so some of these entities are definitely based in the neurology, right? Our neurology is able to run different personalities to do a lot of tasks like that. What about the entities that are outside of humans, right? Are there, you know, spirits, nature spirits and fairies and ghosts and things like that? Again, my model agnosticism wants to stamp a big maybe on all of that. But I do think there are, right? Why the hell not, right? I mean, if humans can do that, why can't other complex networks? There was actually a piece in Scientific American, where they were talking about the dissociative identity studies where they were seeing the different brains. And they said it's actually a compelling evidence for the Gaia theory that we are the smaller entities that are populating this bigger mind, right? The mind of the planet of Earth or whatever, and that if it's possible to happen in our own brain, why is it impossible to happen with the whole planet? And the person, you know, and in as stodgy a publication as Scientific American, they were arguing for the fact that yeah, we may be the sub personalities of this greater entity of the Gaia mind, which I thought was sort of mind blowing that that was even an argument raised in Scientific American at all. Uh,
Yeah.
but just, you know, a cool idea in general. And I've had experiences where, you know, certainly I've been practicing in the occult for most of my life, and certainly some crazy things that have happened. I did actually the guy who is the main guy who runs the Black Moon Publishing, where Brain Magick is about to be re-released. He's a voodoo guy, and he was working on a project. Lou Martinet, and he's working on a project to bring. There was a character who lived in New Orleans way back when named Dr. John, and the famous musician named himself after the voodoo priest Dr. John. Dr. John's the one who really he did a lot of very cool things for New Orleans voodoo. He was one of the seminal people in the form of drumming that they do, and he did a lot of very interesting magic and stuff like that. And so Lou, he's been working on this project to raise Dr. John to the level of a Loa, to acknowledge him as, like, you know, like a voodoo saint, I guess, right? So I participated in some of these rituals, and the first one I went to, we're drumming, we're dancing around. He's talking a little bit about Dr. John, and I keep getting distracted, and I'm looking up. We were outdoors in a field at like midnight, and I kept getting distracted, and I'm looking up at the sky and staring at the stars and going, "Well, the stars are really nice." And I'm like, "Oh wait, we're doing a ritual. I got to pay attention." And it just kept getting worse through the ritual that I would be just distracted by the stars. And finally, at the end of the ritual, he closed there. A bunch of weird stuff happened. I'm not even going to go into it. But at the end of the ritual, he closed it up and he said, "Thank you, Dr. John, gazer of the skies." And I was like, afterwards, I'm like, "Hey, Lou, excuse me." I think something weird happened out there. So, yeah, I got possessed a little bit in a voodoo ritual, which was weird, and you know, definitely the sensation of like thoughts and behaviors that were not native to my own brain. It was kind of an odd experience, and it happens, you know. And I've been to enough
Who
voodoo rituals
who's
that I've seen it happen to other people. Yeah.
whomst amongst us has not been possessed at a voodoo ritual, right? Something has been happening. Something interesting has been happening to me lately where, and it doesn't feel unsafe or anything, but I am accustomed to bringing in messages from my own guides and spirits through cards and pendulum. And I often joke like where, you know, there's that joke about neurodivergent folks like myself where like I can't hear without my subtitles like when we're watching TV. I've often joked like I can't hear without my pendulum. Like I hold the pendulum and there is an openness that happens in me and I'll figure out kind of what they're trying to say and then I'll confirm it with the pendulum just to make sure it's actually the correct guidance and not just my intrusive thoughts happening. But something that has been happening lately as I've been doing this is I feel like there are some of my spirits who almost like get a little like kind of almost benevolently frustrated with me and all of a sudden I will find myself bursting out a sentence and I know and it's not from me, it's barely even in my own voice, it's a different tone, it feels like it comes from somewhere else and I'm like I just spoke for the spirit who is speaking to me, I just said the thing like to myself, which has been an interesting experience.
It it happens, right? Pendulums are good. We'll sometimes do that in hypnosis to get people used to the idea that their unconscious mind can speak through them in ways outside of their conscious mind. But traditionally, pendulums were also used to talk to entities and so on in a similar way. My late wife was a pendulum fanatic, and she would just make them on the fly. She always had some string and just whatever it was, she'd tie something to it and go. And I mean, she would do this towards the end of her life. She was in the hospital for a while, and the doctors would come in and they'd say, oh, we have this medicine or this medicine, and she'd go, just a moment, and pull out her pendulum and douse it. And they'd all be looking, what the hell, right? She didn't care. It was fine with her if they thought she was weird, but it made for some good decisions and so on that way. And she was able to. She had some spirits and stuff that she regularly communicated with that way. I'm more I do sometimes use pendulums in the hypnosis setting as just as a way to get people used to that ideomotor response kind of thing. I'm more of a tarot card guy in general. But when I first learned tarot, oh so many years ago, the idea was that there was a spirit, there was an angel set over the tarot who was the one who was manipulating the cards and providing the answers. And you would say a little prayer or a little invocation to the entity before you did your reading. And I did that. I don't do that anymore because I don't know. I've used tarot cards for so many decades that it's pretty much just a natural thing for me to do it. But back then, I did that every time for years and years and years. Where oh, angels set over the tarot, guide my answers and so on. So I don't know, an intermediary of a spirit or something like that, but the idea is more that the spirit is the one who's manipulating the cards rather than you.
So, given that you have this set of tools, I'm curious, what is the biggest change that you have ever made in yourself? Because you've seen it, you know
Oh,
how it works. And I would imagine, like, me being me, I'm like, I know what I change in myself, or I'm like, oh, how far can I push this? How great can I be, or whatever that is. So, what has that been like for you?
well, I was, back in the day, I mean, through school and college and so on, again, I was painfully shy, and it took a great effort of will for me to go up to a stranger and talk to them, or sometimes even somebody in a store, in a retail setting, stuff like that. But as I got further into the magic, it was one of the things that I consciously worked on. But I also put myself in situations where I had to do it. And I don't know, Robert Anton Wilson inspired me on some of this where, he said when he was learning the tarot, he would just tell people, "I'm an expert on this. Let's do a reading." And then he was learning. He was not an expert on it until much later. But that confidence of just, getting out there and doing it so that you're face to face with people and so on. So I set myself up with a lot of situations like that. I did do tarot readings for other people. I started doing more with the NLP, and eventually I started, teaching classes, and I went from like very introverted to, I guess there are folks out there who consider me very extroverted these days, perhaps perhaps even a little annoying. Uh, so probably the biggest change in my life that way, from I did wanna write back then and so on, but even then, I get worried. I was worried about my audience and who's gonna read it and whatever, but I got past all and, I don't know, my magic books are written for, they're written for an audience, right? They're written for a particular set of people who are interested in magic or might be able to use that kind of change or whatever. My fiction or whatever, I also write novels. My novels are written purely for myself. They're just something I do to like other people do jigsaw puzzles, I'll sit down and write a novel. So, the freedom to be able to just write or say or do whatever I feel like doing, is good. I mean, I revel in it. So, whereas at one time I was just way more concerned about, "Oh, people gonna think I'm weird," or blah, blah, blah. I am weird. I'm weird.
And that's huge because that's really the difference between you getting to live a life that you love versus not, right? Like that's really, for me, that's the heart of why I do this work, is the courage to be able to, for me and for those that I teach or work with, to be able to pursue the life we love with a fearlessness, and not even a fearlessness, but an agency that says I can give myself the patterns that support me doing the things that I love. And if I can do that, then I can have a life that I love, which means I'm gonna be happy. I'd love to bring on Tomi now. We bring
Right.
on Tomi at the end of every episode to ask a deep cut question. Tomi, can I also brag about
Okay.
you to Phil before you ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Tomi is in my advanced container, and Tomi very recently discovered an issue within herself that she wanted to change. It was something that was manifesting externally, but likely had an internal start, as most things do. And I was so incredibly proud of her because she combined the Meta-Magick that we've gone over, because we've studied Brain Magick in that container. She combined one of those exercises with like 2 or 3 different other things that we've studied and put them all together and did this sort of evocation ritual that you detail in the book. And she came back with this like long, incredible narrative about what had happened and created that change. So I was just like, God, like this is this is exactly why we do what we do, is so we have this tool set of different modalities, different exercises, things that we can bring together and create change in the moment, to pick from all the colors on the palette and figure out what it is we need to create that change. So I'm especially interested to hear what her question is going to be today, considering her recent success with your work in her own life.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry to let you down, Arden, but my question unfortunately has nothing to do with that. In fact,
Well, I'm glad I bragged about you anyway, because you
yeah,
deserve it.
I'm glad about that too. It actually relates to something I could not track down in preparation for this interview, but I am fiercely curious about. And that is your novel, Breaks, The Adventures of Richard Nixon in the 21st Century. I
Okay.
scoured the internet trying to find a copy of that to peruse before meeting you today, and sadly was not able to find a copy. So I would love for you to fill us in on that book and how you feel it's aged in the year of our Lord 2026.
Well, Ernest Hemingway famously said that all writers should throw out their first novel, and allegedly he took a ship out into the middle of the ocean and dumped his first novel into the waves. Uh, that was my first attempt at a novel. It was a lot of fun to write, and again, my fiction I write for my own amusement. There's a character in there. I had characters based on the people I was hanging around with at the time. There's a character in there named Primordial Stew, who was based on Genesis PR, and some other. And
Hmm.
I had some fun with it. It was about a glitch in the matrix, I guess, about a problem with the internet where stuff would become garbled, and I used a cut up technique. Whenever that would kick in, the text would become very random, which of course made the novel kind of hard to read. And I don't know. I was learning how to write a novel there, so I did let it go out of print, and it remains that way. Maybe one day I will pull it out and maybe try to rewrite it or something like that. The main premise, though, when I wrote it, Richard Nixon was still alive, right? It's the adventures of Richard Nixon in the 21st century.
Hmm.
I wrote this in the 20th century, and Nixon was still alive. Like many science fiction writers, I thought we would be further into space than we are now, things like that. So some of it did not age well. When Nixon died a few years later after I wrote it, I was like, "Oh, damn! How's he gonna?" But in the book, he's rejuvenated to the age of 23 and has his adventures. He was sort of the perfect anti-hero, right? He was a character who was so evil and corrupt or whatever that when he changes, it's a bigger change or whatever. But again, my first novel, I did get better at writing novels. There's probably a pirated copy floating around out there. Take a look. I am told I did release it as an ebook, and this was in the 1990s, and I am told, I've been told by a couple people that it was in fact the first science fiction novel released as an ebook, which, yay, okay. I'll take that as a, something, a kudo. But as my writing ability went, it wasn't, I don't think it was a great novel. So go read, you want to read my novels, go read The Great Purple Hoo-Ha or Legendary Blue Smoke, which are the ones I recommend. The Great Purple Hoo-Ha as a kind of introduction to my fiction. All the novels, even Breaks, had enough like magic in it that I occasionally get people who tell me, "Oh, I learned how to do this particular ritual from your novel." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." Not really my intent to teach magic in the novels. Again, they're purely for my own amusement. But if somebody gets something like that out of it, fine. I personally learned how to meditate out of a Robert Heinlein book when I was 11 years old. So, pass it along, I guess.
Awesome. Well, I'll start there on your fiction journey. Thanks for that.
Well, thank you once again, Phil. It has been such a pleasure having you on the show. This is not the first time that you and I have talked, and you've come in to guest teach for my classes, which I was always very grateful for. And the one thing that I really want folks to take away from this episode is, again, just the idea that you can change, you can hack the code that makes up your neural pathways. You can change your mind from the inside out. And when you do that, I promise you, you will see differences in your external results. And you can continue this and continue refining it until you have a life that you are happy with. And for me, I know that has been the difference between whether I feel engaged and powerful in my own life and capable of making the changes that I want versus whether I felt powerless to do anything about my circumstances. So if there's anything that anyone is listening to take away from this, take away that much. You can change your mind and it will change your life. Thank you again so much, Phil. Where can people find you and what else should they check out?
Oh, as we are speaking right now, I have a guy who is reviving my website. Hopefully by the time people watch this, it will be up and running. It is Meta-Magick.com, META-MAGICK.com. And hopefully that will be, I'm hoping he's got it done like later this afternoon.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again for joining us, Phil. And thank you to all our listeners out there. And thanks for tuning in. And go practice Meta-Magick. Change your mind, change your life. And we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Repatterning Podcast. If you're curious about the Repatterning Project, the 8-week course in mental mastery and creative freedom that inspires these conversations, you can check out more details at therepatterningproject.com. We run a cohort twice a year, or you can download the self-study version of the course and get started today. We also offer a 4-week course on narrative magic and archetype titled Myths and Magic, Changing Your Life Through Story, also twice a year. If you'd like to join our community, the Repatterning Parlor, on Discord, you can sign up for $5 a month at patreon.com/therepatterningpodcast. Thanks to everyone who makes the Repatterning Podcast possible. Firstly, our award-winning producer, Tomi Trembath of the Keymaster Collective network of podcasts. She also produces Transcending Comics, Vision in the Void, and Giant-Sized Violence. Thanks also to animation studio Mortis Madriax, who created the video for our introduction, as well as to Andrew Means, who composed and produced our theme music. And also thanks to Alvarez, who took the photos of yours truly that you see on the cover of each episode if you're watching the video version. And finally, thanks to you, our listeners, who give meaning to this work. Our greatest wish is that whatever you've heard today inspires you to live freely and begin creating your reality from the inside out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.